So yeah, thank you all for joining me today in this very special new space. As I said, some of you know my work very, very well, and some of you I'll be introducing you to it for the first time, which is very exciting for me. I am mainly talking about my recent master's project that I developed during my time at Chelsea College of Arts here in London, which I titled Making in Memory, a Personal Exploration of Commemorating Creatively. And this, for a bit of context, this was a pursuit of mine following the deaths of my dad and my brother in December 2017. So since that time, I've sort of found the need to continue my relationships with them in new ways, really accepting and acknowledging that our relationships had this massive shift, but also realizing that I could build new elements to my relationships with them. And actually, this is something that was really nice that it came up in one of the sessions I attended earlier, the memory quilts session with Terry, because she also referenced this need to form new connections and new elements of a relationship, which is something then I sort of took into my creative practice and has been a pursuit of mine ever since. But my exploration of this actually started before I decided to do my master's. And I think I can sort of pinpoint this as the first time that I started exploring this, even though I was sort of unaware of it at the time. But this was on my brother's 28th birthday, what would have been his 28th birthday. He passed away at 25 years old. And I found this need to mark the occasion and to make something. I've always found that I've turned to sort of very creative means whenever I have this urge of expression. It always expresses itself through creativity. And so on his birthday in April 2020, I made this series of cyanotype prints in my garden, using objects that I'd foraged and found from around the garden. And cyanotype printing is a method that relies on the sun to expose the chemicals. So it's very sort of, it has quite a natural focus and also a slightly meditative quality, because you have to wait while the sun is exposing the chemicals and printing the image of whatever you've laid on top of that piece of paper or fabric. You just have to wait for the sun to work its magic. And then you wash off the remaining chemical and the image sort of comes to life. And you see what you've spent that time waiting for to expose. So this, for me, was a really contemplative process. It was a time to stop and reflect and think of my brother. And it was this first time that I'd thought of a creative process as a space for meditation in a way. And these 8 prints I sent out to family members across the globe, from Germany to America, all over the place. And I really felt this need for connection. It was at the beginning of the pandemic. Normally my family would sort of come together around these special days, such as my brother's birthday. So it was really nice to be able to send something out to them, this memorial object, that so that they could have a piece to remember and mark my brother's 28th birthday. And then on the right is some images of this top that I made for myself using the panels that I'd printed on that same day, on my brother's birthday, which I really love this idea of being able to take my brother's memory out into the world, rather than it being a static thing. I've made this fabric and I've made this this print and then this garment from the time that I've spent thinking of my brother, and then I can take it out into the world with me. So reflecting on this now, I can see that this is the first time that I thought of memorial objects as having a use beyond their commemoration, so that you can almost memorialize someone through wearing or through using an item too. So this really, really interested me, and it sort of planted the seed to explore this idea of commemorating through a creative process that I then went on to pursue a bit more formally by studying for a master's in textile design at Chelsea. And so straight away I knew that I wanted to commemorate my dad and my brother and dedicate my master's to this act and to this process. But I really didn't know how that would look or what it would result in. I am a rug tufter, so I knew that I would be using the medium of rug tufting at some point. And I started researching historical and traditional practices of commemoration across the globe. And these are just a very, very few examples of the practices of commemoration that I researched, just so that I could really understand how and why people have commemorated births, marriages, events, periods of time, and specifically trauma through making particularly textiles. So yeah, it was very important for me to understand this global context so that I can situate my own practice within that. But at this point, I was really searching for a starting point, and I got to a space of overthinking it and over worrying about what the end result would be. So it was quite important for me to just relax into an exploration. So for this exercise, I used a playlist of music that I'd made, of music that I strongly associate with my brother and takes me back to moments with him. And then I just started drawing very, very freely. And each little drawing that you see here is just took the length of a single song. So very short, immediate, and very intuition-led. And this then formed quite a large part of my practice later on, this idea of just being led by intuition and not worrying too much about the end result, but enjoying the process. But yeah, this was an exploration. It was a great exercise and quite experimental for me, and it helped to free up my practice and free up my approach. But I was still searching for a starting point. But at this point, a very, very serendipitous thing happened, that my laptop broke, which was a nightmare. But it also threw up something very beautiful, because that's when I started using my dad's laptop that he'd bought just before his death, but that had all of his files and folders on that. It's quite overwhelming to start looking through them, but I found this very special folder of images, and they're photos of rock and moss and lichen that he'd taken on a climbing trip. My dad was a climber, and me and my brother had sort of grown up climbing, going on climbing trips every possible weekend. But my dad was also a painter, and a lot of his inspiration came from rock and natural environments and his interaction with rock. So I knew that he had taken these images as a way of sort of gathering inspiration for his own creative work. And these images are so special to me. They're more personal than a photo of my dad, which is why I'm not sharing them here, because they feel incredibly private. They really provided me a chance to see through his eyes, which was really beautiful, and a chance to be in a space with him. It created this shared space where we were both examining the natural elements in these photos, the textures and the colours of the rock, and I could almost hear what he would be noticing and pointing out to me. So yeah, it was a very powerful experience to discover these photos for the first time. So I really wanted to open up this shared space and investigate it a bit further, and this idea of connecting with him through viewing and using these images. It felt like I was in his company again, and I wanted to stretch that further. So I thought, how can I really investigate these images through my own practice of making? I started making this series of etchings using a dry point etching technique, which is very simple and using recycled materials, and it's very it's a speedy process. It's not the type of etching where you need all of the chemicals and all of lots of preparation. It's just scratching into a plastic coated sheet to make these marks. And again, I was just really concerned about being in this shared space with my dad. It was less about formal representation, less about really exactly copying the images of the rock, but it was about spending the time observing the images of the rock and then feeling that through my own process of making, of being in this shared space with my dad. So these are very, very small prints, 10 by 7 centimeters and then 6 by 8 centimeters. So they're tiny, and they felt quite special to me to be making in this way, which is sort of the opposite of my dad's creative practice, because he made these enormous, these great big canvases of abstract paintings. And yet I could always see his inspiration from nature. He often combined like sand within the paint so that it had this sort of stark texture. And some of these textural elements of the rock I really tried to capture through this quite sort of scratchy mark making that you see in the prints here. And I was really glad that this process captured some of that. So at this point, I was aware that I was starting this ritual of reflection, ritual of interaction that could lead to a ritual of commemoration. And I knew that I had to capture this for the sake of my masters, to be able to write about it, but also for my own sort of archive. But I found it really, really hard to put down on paper through journaling or capturing it through photos or videoing. I felt like none of these methods really captured the full scope of what I was experiencing, which was very frustrating. And I tried so many different methods of journaling, but I've never really been able to gel with it in that way. I think there's often the sense of pressure that everything you write has to be perfect, or at least I feel that's my own sort of putting pressure on myself. The only thing that really helped me document this process was writing these messy notes in my phone, just on the notes app on my phone. And as you can see here from my screenshots, they are a complete jumble of ideas, reflections, artists to research, questions, display ideas, a whole load of different things. And this helped me to acknowledge that my process was very multifaceted and that I was dealing with a lot of different things at one point, and trying to bring it all together, but acknowledging that there's so much that I was working with here. What really validated this approach was that one of my tutors said, absolutely, this is a valid form of documentation. And so then that became a lot of, formed a sort of base for my research methodology when I came to write about it in my thesis. So yeah, I definitely sort of felt a lot, I guess validated as soon as I realized that what I was instinctively doing could be a form of a research methodology. So then I went back to my prints that I was very aware that I was making on paper, and yet I was studying for a master's in textile design. So, you know, I was sort of questioning, how could one inform and translate into the other? And I came back to this idea of intuition. So these two rock rugs, my first rock rugs, are inspired directly by the prints that I made, but more importantly, by that idea of being in the shared space of interaction and creation. So these were done extremely intuitively. I was working sort of back and forth across different types of yarn. I had the print sort of pinned up on my tufting frame that I was referring back to, and the original images of my dad's, but it wasn't planned out. It was just the idea of going for it and being in that space, which was really lovely. And I was quite pleased when the end result did actually resemble a rock. And I decided very consciously to keep this very textural element. A lot of time in rug tufting, which, by the way, if people don't know, is this process of using a tufting gun, which is a mechanized sort of power tool, essentially, that has the yarn threaded through a needle, and you have a sort of canvas stretched over a frame, and then from that point you can sort of go wherever you want. You have to apply the right amount of pressure and really lean into it, which was something I really enjoyed, this sort of physical aspect. And also the mental aspect that you are working with a power tool, so you can't lose focus, which to me sort of again brought me back to that idea of a meditative state, that it's all consuming. And then, yeah, so you're tufting and you're moving the tufting gun across the frame, across the canvas, and you can work in any direction. So it's very painterly in a way, and I find it a really enjoyable medium to work through. But yeah, often a lot of rug tufters are very concerned with having an even surface, and they shear it afterwards. But I really like this textural quality. I've used lots of different yarns at different points in these samples, and they tuft in different ways, and it's bumpy and there are crevices, which reflects back to this idea of the rock imagery, but also of my dad taking me climbing, and teaching me how to feel the rock and how to engage with it in the best way, so that you can reach that summit, or at least have a nice journey along the way. So at this time I was enjoying my process, but it was also all consuming. I was thinking about my master's project all the time, but also thinking about this idea of commemoration all the time. And you know, those seeds of doubt start to creep in, and you question whether I'm commemorating them in the best way, or the most honest way, or whether I'm doing them justice. And it was quite overwhelming. I realized that all of my making practice was now centered around this idea of commemoration. And I think if I'd allowed that to continue, it would have been quite unhealthy, because it was very emotionally intense. I needed some time outside of this project, and so I started knitting. I only started knitting last year, so I'm not very good, but that really didn't matter. It was this idea of making with my hands in order to rest my mind, and not having any concern over the outcome, or how pretty it was, or how useful it was. It was just about the process of relaxing again and taking time away from my project, so that I could put more valuable energy into my project. So I coined this my anti-project, and I love that these knitted pieces that I attached together. And actually, since that photo, I've got even more lengths to attach. But yeah, so these items, these knitted pieces, now document my moments of rest to more accurately and holistically convey my experience of commemorating my dad and my brother, and this process and this pursuit of commemoration. They show the flip side to the productive, creative world of commemoration, and they instead speak of the moments of quiet and the downtime, and sometimes the moments of despair as well. So with this greater sense of balance, I was able to go back to my tufting with a renewed focus, and I created these series of samples which were just an exploration of how I could interpret through colour, tone, and varying levels of simplicity or intricacy, and then which one spoke to me most. Of course, the whole time I'm thinking, which would Dad and Joseph like the best? Which was, yeah, it was nice to be guided by their input too, especially because at this time I was feeling very close to them. So some of these, so yeah, they're very small again, so they're that size. This one especially, I gravitated towards straight away, and it informed one of my final pieces that I'll show at the end. So yeah, that was a really nice process of, again, freeing myself up and exploring the visual potential of using this, the stimuli of my dad's photos and the etchings that I'd made, and how can I honestly and authentically translate some of those marks and that emotion into visual textiles. So this might sort of come as a bit of a surprise, this idea that I've been working with this sort of very tactile and almost traditional craft of textile creation, and yet here I am incorporating electronic elements. I worked in collaboration with Mei Zhang, who is a PhD researcher in London. She's also an engineer, and she was really interested in this idea of providing textile artists and practitioners with electrical elements and the possibilities for incorporating some engineering into their own works. So it was amazing to work with her because she had the whole sort of experience that I lacked in this field. When she explained the concept and how one of these elements worked, I knew straight away that it could really add value to my work. She showed me how a DIY pressure sensor, once linked up to her homemade circuit board there and coded in the right way, and then linked up to speakers, how this could emit a song or a piece of music or a track of some sort when the pressure sensor is pressed against. And we also fine-tuned it so that the pressure with which you press against this sensor affects the volume that you hear from the speakers. So immediately it brought me back to my sort of key pursuit for new connections with my dad and my brother, and this idea of connection that's at the core of this body of work, because it gives a very, very literal interpretation of this connection to the audience. And it also brings the audience into my ritual that I was creating through making these works, and it brought it into their world and engaged people in a multi-sensory way. So I made several prototypes, and I will share my Vimeo link in the chat afterwards if anyone would like to see my tests and my trials. I was so far out of my comfort zone, and yet I knew that this was a really important element to my project. As I showed right at the beginning with my sort of exploratory work that I'd done with the soundtracks, the music that I associate with my brother, and the drawing very freely, music is so evocative, and it can take you back to a place or a time or a sense of being with someone. And I was quite reluctant to leave that musical element behind when I started developing my rock rugs. And so this was a way of bringing it back into my work. I didn't know what music I was going to use to start with, but I just knew that this really made sense to my process of commemoration and to my relationship with my dad, but more particularly my brother. My brother was extremely musically talented, and he was always making pieces of music in his spare time on his laptop. He collected synthesizers, and he collected old computers that he was taking apart and putting back together and tweaking, and always making these strange sounds with them. And I wanted to use some of my brother's music, but I had no idea how to find it, as I'm sure many people here who've lost a loved one, when you're confronted with technology or someone's old laptop and you don't have the password, or all of these very technical, specific, annoying things that are just so frustrating when you just want it all to be simple. So I was asking family members if they had any of my brother's music anywhere, but nobody had anything. And then 3 days before my final submission of my work, I came across a completely random hard drive that I had squirreled away somewhere, which had a folder on it that had a series of, I think, 12 tracks that my brother had made as a potential game soundtrack in 2015. So this was just the most beautiful moment. Because it's all electronic music. Some of it was way too intense, but there are a couple of tracks on there that were really, really beautiful and atmospheric, and I just knew straight away that I wanted other people to hear them, and that incorporating them into my work would be a way of letting people hear them, but more importantly, letting Joseph speak again, and letting him be in that space, and bringing him into the present moment for other people to interact with. And I think he also would have found it very, very cool that my rugs were playing his music. So I felt I had his blessing there. So back to the sort of very practical side of my making. I was very aware of the waste that I was producing through my tufting. When you spend a few hours tufting, the floor is absolutely littered with all of these little fronds of yarn that are too small to do anything with, really, or so I thought. But I collected them up anyway, and I really wanted to reincorporate them back into the items that I was making so that my practice was zero waste. So collected them all up, as you can see there, and then I started felting with them using wool from British sheep, and then layering all of the waste within the layers. As you can see here, this was one of my first samples, and I really enjoy the multicoloured nature, and the fact that you can see the waste, and that this then celebrates the waste. It's not hiding it but using it. It's using it and really allowing you to see it and enjoy it. So I made some massive sheets of felt, very physical process again, and I layered all of the waste from my tufting process into it, and then I used that as the backing fabric for the 3 commemorative rugs that I made as my final pieces for my body of work, for my master's body of work. So I will show you them now. This was when I was making my first commemorative rug, which also then became my musical rug. And this was a really beautiful process. This is the one that I sort of was very inspired by this small sample. I really like the monochrome aspect of it, which I then sort of delved deeper into and added a real variety of grey tones within the composition. And I feel the monochrome sort of gives you this sort of quite calm feeling and a space for reflection. I like the idea that my process is a sort of ritual of reflection, but that also that the rugs can provide a space for reflection for people in their finished state. So this one is called In Your Company, which again is a reference to feeling like I am in my dad and my brother's company while making these pieces. It was a really lovely experience because I felt like I'd gone on a journey to get to this point, and I felt like it was very authentic to me. I hadn't forced anything through this process. It came about through moments of serendipity and moments of trust in my creative process, and reminding myself to believe in myself and believe in my relationships with my dad and my brother, and allowing it to evolve quite naturally. So as I said, this was the musical rug. So when I exhibited it at the Chelsea MA final exhibition, just this September just gone, visitors were invited to first take their shoes off and then step onto the rug. And the moments of sort of surprise from people was really gratifying. I got some amazing feedback as people were sort of crawling on top of it and then stepping off and feeling the music die away and then coming back to it as it sort of pulsated. And people loved the music without even knowing the full story behind it. And I really enjoyed telling people that story and proudly sharing that it was my brother's music. And of course, you know, it's an excellent piece of musical composition, but it was nice to hear that from other people too. My second final piece was this one that I used used this quite muted palette of pinks and creams and browns. This one I feel reflects possibly more literally some of the rock imagery, which it was really nice to see during the exhibition that people were engaging with it. I wanted people to touch it and to feel it, to again add that other layer to my creative process, you know, this final stage of showing it and letting other people engage with it. And a few people were sort of mimicking how they would climb on it if it was a really big rock, and that was really lovely to see. This one's called Sandstone and Coronetta, the same one that I just showed. And the title is a reference to, you may have spotted it earlier, in the folder of images on my dad's laptop. One of the folders within that was called Sandstone and Coronetta. So it really speaks of this shared connection that came from that folder of images. And also my time climbing with my dad on the southern sandstone in Kent that we went down to almost every weekend when I was little. My last final piece was this one that I really enjoyed making, because although time was very precious in this period of final production before my deadlines, the other two were done and dusted, and I had enough time to really engage with this one and spend time in that reflective space of connection with my dad and my brother. This one I think was the most intuition led. There are so many different tones of green, which sometimes the photographs don't really do justice to, but yeah, I was switching back and forth between different shades of green, just really enjoying that process of making and reflection. And it's called Ecos de Montserrat, which is again one of the titles of the folders on my dad's laptop, because it's also the name of the place in Spain where he took those photos when he was on a climbing trip with his climbing buddies. But ecos also means echoes in Spanish, which felt very fitting and again serendipitous, as I felt like these pieces were an echo of my dad and my brother's presence in my life and my relationship to them. So that's sort of where I'm at with these pieces. It was amazing to exhibit them and to tell my story to people in the flesh after they'd sort of encountered them themselves. And telling that story did make me feel extremely vulnerable at the start. And then I got into the swing of it and I found some really beautiful connections came from sharing this work that's very grief focused and really catalogues the development of my grief over this period of a year. Also in my thesis that I submitted, I had sort of drawn up this chart that again formed a huge part of my research methodology that was charting my creative development along the sort of parallels of how my grief felt at different points. And I could see where the moments of inspiration really lifted me up, and then moments of overthinking it and questioning it. And, you know, these questions came to mind of, why is my grief special? Why would anyone care about hearing about my experiences? But what always led me back to the importance of my project was the importance of my dad and my brother to me, and this almost primal need to continue my relationship with them, and to continue their presence in my life. So I felt that as long as I was following that and being true to that sentiment, then my work would speak authentically. So this is me. If you'd like to get in touch, my Instagram's there, or my email too. And thought I'd just leave you with those words from Etel Adnan, who's one of my dad's favourite artists and poets, and also one of my favourite artists and poets. And I think that's a really beautiful short poem and speaks of my experience of creating these works. So yes, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed my talk. Hope I didn't speak too quickly.
No, that was perfect. I just want to invite anyone that has any questions to pop them into the chat. Absolutely amazing. And thank you also just for being so there's something so vulnerable about this work, and sharing it so freely with us feels like a gift. So thank you. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, because there was so much in there that was just fantastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's actually really lovely to be in this space to share it specifically. You know, I presented my work obviously to my classmates, and my tutors throughout the year. And I felt sometimes that I slightly had to censor my experiences a bit.
Yeah.
And even just the other day when I was presenting my work to the new current MA students, one of the main feedback that I got from the tutor was that it's very shocking, which is something I wasn't expecting at all.
Wow.
And I felt that, of course, she's perfectly entitled to her opinion, and maybe she's not prepared to have this discussion around death and grief. But I almost feel that my work for me is the opposite of the shock and the trauma that I went through with my dad and my brother's death. I feel I could share many more shocking things than her. But it was, for me, it's a process of building these new connections rather than just using shock factor.
Absolutely.
Of death and grief. But yeah, so it's really, really lovely to share it within this context where I don't feel I have to just
welcome
elements. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, also the whole point of art is to make you think, right? And it is uncomfortable sometimes, but it provokes the most enriching and critical dialogue that we need to be having, right? How has embarking on this journey, I guess, influenced your relationship with mortality?
Well, yes, actually, I through making these works, I did start to think about their life beyond me, and recognizing that I will die at some point, and that I want these pieces to go on meaning something to other people. And again, this relates actually to one of Terry's points in her talk on the memorial quilts, this idea of creating an heirloom. And so for me, the storytelling aspect of my work and passing on the story of how they're made and why they're made is really important to their integrity as commemorative items. And then also, in the technical side of things, I created this idea of I came up with the concept of a modern heirloom. So the storytelling aspect is very important, but also using materials that will last the longest and will allow a piece to go on living was very important. So I researched the longevity of all the materials that I was potentially using, while also being conscious of their earthly impact.
Amazing. Yeah, anyone? We have a comment from Judith. Sounds like your tutor's own stuff around this, not the work itself. I agree.
Thank you.
I agree.
The validation I need. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. June says a very beautiful session, well crafted. Thank you. Thank you, June. Yeah, it's true. It's amazing. And the intersection between not only like the craft that you do, but bringing in the music and the technological aspect, is like just took it kind of like a whole step further,
It did. It added another layer to my work through incorporating my brother's music, but then this layer that I could not have predicted of people's interactions with my work. When I exhibited them, some people were moved to tears by this feeling of connection that you can get through stepping on something and having the sound emitted. It's also very lovely to think about the purpose of rugs throughout history and traditions of prayer mats in certain cultures and stepping onto a rug in order to feel connected to the earth and to other souls. And so I did lots of research into historical and traditional concepts of rug making, which was very fun.
Well, it's so interesting, right? And it always just amazes me how much how much can be held in an object, I guess, of all sorts. And what a good point about religious affiliation and connection and all of that. It's just, and also I love how much you went into this. Of course you had to, it's a thesis, but how extraordinary. Sam says, I've gained so much from this talk. From where I am in my grief to be able to take a next step to creative expression and connect with my dead loved ones. Thank you so much, Clem.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm so pleased to be able to share my work so sort of holistically with you all, to have this space to do so. Thank you, Judith, for reminding me to share the Vimeo link, which I've put in there, which is definitely the more technological side of my process. But feel free to have a look. And then I share a lot about my process as well over on my Instagram, which is at Studio Forms.
Yeah, definitely go and follow it. It's a great resource. Helen says, so many aspects of art brought together by grief. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find it interesting because obviously grief is a loss and like it feels like a disconnect. But then we really, really, like, it's just human nature. We're desperate for that connection in any way. And art's like the medium in which we can do that, right? It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's definitely something I gravitated towards straight away through my own sort of creative need, but also through acknowledging that my dad and my brother were both incredibly creative. So it really feels like a way of connecting with them and building relationships with them.
We have a comment from June. My father made rag rugs which was an important way of recycling in the 1950s. Oh, that's awesome.
Yes, I've actually never made a rag rug, but I'd really like to try. Maybe potentially combining it with some of the thoughts that Terry was talking about in her memorial quilts. You do something quite interesting with, the garments or textiles belonging to a loved one to make a rag rug, which is, I've heard, a very nice process. I haven't tried it myself, but yeah, there's an idea.
Yeah, I was gifted not that long ago a couple of shirts from a loved one that's died, and just having that like tangible thing really, really, like, I was moved. I immediately started bawling my eyes out, because it really it's again that connection. You get that connection immediately. So to somehow incorporate that, wow, Judith, what a brilliant combination of ideas it is.
Yeah. I mean, I still wear a lot of my brother's and my dad's clothes, so I'm not quite ready to cut them all up yet.
Yeah.
But maybe some of the less special ones.
Yeah. Mariana, the stories and meaning behind your work makes it incredibly special.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's really lovely to hear that from people that aren't me, because obviously it's very special to me. And I was hoping that it would convey well to other people as well. At several points I was thinking, everyone grieves. Why do I have to talk about this? Why would anyone else care about this? And then right at the end, once we'd finished the last day of our MA exhibition, two of my classmates said that they'd never lost anyone personally, close to them, and that this was a really interesting insight into that and very touching for them. And to see my whole process develop over the year, they found it really moving, which was incredibly gratifying and put to bed all of those doubts that I'd had along the way, which was lovely.
Judith says it's both a unique and universal experience, I think. Yeah, it's both.
Yeah, and that's something that I was exploring through some of my writing in my thesis. I forgot to mention that my undergraduate degree was in history of art with museum studies. So I was drawing on a lot of mainly contemporary examples, actually, of other artists and writers who'd explored themes of grief and death. And what kept coming up was, the unique and universal, but also how important it is to tell your story authentically.
Yeah, what a beautiful word, authentically. It's true.
And
I'm always blown away, I guess, at how even if two people have experienced the loss of the same person, like, they experience their grief in an entirely different way, right? Like, it's...
Yeah, and that's actually been why it's really, it's been really nice to share my process and share my final pieces with my other family members, with my mum and with my cousins and aunts and grandma as well, because it also gives them a space for reflection on their relationships to my dad and my brother.
What a gift. Wow.
Yeah, I'm just reading through all the lovely, lovely comments from everyone here. Thank you all so much for being here and spending time with me. As I said, I share a lot more about my process and some more details and snippets from my thesis on my Instagram account. but also, I guess it's important to say that as I was writing my thesis, I was trying to pinpoint an end point to this body of work that aligned with the completion of my final pieces. And yet it became so apparent that there was no endpoint, and that this body of work and this process is the start of my life's work. And whether it will continue within the same medium or different medium, or always processing my own grief or helping others to process theirs and create commemorative textiles for other people, however it takes its form, I know that this will just be ongoing for me, and that there's no sort of end point to this body of work.
That's so exciting. You know, there's like all the possibilities just ahead. Yeah.
It was also a very useful thing to write in my thesis, that I was sort of like, well, there's no conclusion.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, there's not much to argue with there.
June says, our society is so taken up with products to value process is terrific. Yeah, the process.
Yeah. I hope that came across. Maybe I should have said more explicitly that, straight away when I started this work, it was so apparent. Even before I started my master's, when I was making those cyanotype prints, it was all about the process. All about the process. And if that creates a memorial object at the end, then that's beautiful and special. But it's more important that that object speaks of the process and the time taken to make it, and the space that you inhabit while making it.
We have a comment from Anita. I've only just managed to join. Sorry, can I watch this one back? Yes, absolutely. All of the sessions and main stage things, unless it's private, like a death cafe or something where people are sharing quite vulnerably, they are all available. If you look at the left side of your screen, at the very bottom, it'll say replay. In about 5 minutes after we're done, the whole talk should be up on there. So at any point you can go back and watch, and definitely go and do that if you missed out, because you didn't want to miss this one.
Oh, that's great to know, actually. So I can share it with other people that haven't been able to make it.
Yes, exactly. Right. June shared part of a poem. I too will something make, and joy in the making.
That's really lovely. Yeah.
I also loved your knitting and the idea behind it. So easy to get stuck otherwise. Oh yeah, I loved the knitting part.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just a very useful tool to make sure that I was approaching this very emotionally taxing body of work in a balanced and healthy way, really. And I sort of started it without thinking about what role it was serving, and then I realized what it was doing for me, and that helped when I was writing about my process as well. Oh, I Love All Beauteous Things by Robert Bridges. I'll write that down.
Thank you, June.
Thank you, June. And
we've got some poem fans of.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, June.
Nice. And also, if anybody doesn't know Etel Adnan, who I've shared that piece from, she passed away actually just last weekend at the ripe old age of 96. But she was a huge inspiration to my dad and me, and she allowed her work provide this first space of connection that I felt to my dad, and then I went on to explore how I could open that up further. But her work is just beautiful, both her paintings and her poetry and philosophical texts as well.
Oh, Anita's put the poem in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I love all beauteous things. I seek and adore them. God hath no better praise, and man in his hasty days is honored for them. I too will something make, and joy in the making, although tomorrow it seem like the empty words of a dream remembered on waking. Thank you. Well, I think that's a perfect way to wrap up this hour.
Yeah,
and
thank
also
you so much for sharing.
We have a comment. the process journey is the most important part.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stand by that.
But yes, thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us. Again, like, this space not only is interested, but encourages the stories and all of the inspiration behind the work that you're doing. Because people can see themselves within it at some point, right? And so, yeah, I'm just grateful to have been able to hear you share, and I'm so excited to see what happens in the future.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for giving me this space and for helping to moderate. And then also, yeah, thank you to Jo and Victoria as well for giving all of us this space to share and connect.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's been very special to be here today. Thank you.
It is. It feels very special to me as well. So thank you very, very much. And thank you to everybody who engaged in this dialogue. Without you guys, it would be half the experience. So thank you so much. This is what it's all about, right? It's connection and love and commemoration and art and beauty. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.